Welcome to Non-Duality with Meister Eckhart. In this series, we practice non-duality as inspired by the teachings of the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart. Today, we are looking at the 11th article of evidence against Meister Eckhart that was used in the Inquisition that occurred at the turn of the 14th century. Of course, the irony of this is that they have captured the perspective of the mystic, which helps us today to modulate into actual non-dual contemplative practices. And we're going to also be practicing non-dual meditation. We'll be taking 3 large breaths, and then we're going to be shifting into the meditative placement of attention. And let's just remember that the dual perspective is that life is happening to us. I am not my environment. And in the non-dual meditative placement of attention, life is simply just happening. It is not happening to anyone. It may be difficult at first when you start to be exposed to this type of teaching. We tend to think that, well, life has to be happening to someone. And it does. That is in the dual perspective. However, there is an underlying unity that supports our lives. And that underlying life is our own life. It is the absolute life. And it is itself. So in the non-dual perspective, we shift into the meditative placement of attention, allowing life to be of itself. We let hearing hear, we let seeing see. We modulate into it is as it is rather than it is as it should be. The 11th article of evidence against Meister Eckhart reads, "Whatever God the Father gave to his only begotten Son in human nature, he gave all this to me." And so Meister Eckhart confesses his revelations, and it's going to produce some problems for him. It will trigger an inquisition, and of course this tends to threaten the authorities of the time, and also the general perspective of the Church, who has yet to mature to non-duality. In other words, Christ, the incarnation of the Godhead, is yet to be universalized. And Meister Eckhart, at the turn of the 14th century, recognized the singularity of the Godhead, and recognized also the underlying singularity in the relative field, the world of diversity. He looked at the world and realized it was himself. As we say in non-duality, what we're looking at is what is looking. And the 12th article again reads, strikes again at this same point. Whatever the Holy Scriptures say of Christ is also true of every good and divine man. So again, we're seeing the universality of the relative field and its commonality with absolute God. So this is a different perspective. The Western culture indeed sees the Godhead, generally speaking, the Western culture sees the Godhead as a monarch, as an authority, pretty much as a divine administrator, and the world as inconsistent with that same administrator. And also we are less than Christ, generally speaking, in the Western culture. And This is the devotional perspective. We raise the incarnation to the divine level of Godhead, and then we worship that incarnation, and at the same time we are worshiping life itself. And this is fine. And again, it is. We are in an evolving church, and part of our work today is to continue that evolution. The 12th article, rather the 13th article, is almost stunning, and I will read it to you. Whatever is proper to the divine nature, all that is proper to the just and divine man, which re-expresses what we've just talked about. Because of that, this man performs whatever God performs. So we're seeing that commonality again. And furthermore, he created heaven and earth together with God. Who? Christ created heaven and earth with God. However, that Christ is incarnated as Meister Eckhart, that Christ is incarnated as you and me. We have been co-creative with infinite being. We are identifying ourselves, and look at the term ourselves. You can see quickly when we think of ourselves, we're back in the dual world. In the non-dual world, we recognize, for example, that we are not necessarily in a skin bag. No air. We breathe the air. We partake of the sunlight and of the entire environment. And without an environment, we do not exist. So it is acceptable to recognize ourselves as the whole. And this is what Meister Eckhart is doing, and this is what is difficult for us in the Western culture. And I'll continue to read. And he is the begetter of the eternal word, and meaning that you and I are the begetters of the eternal word. And God would not know how to do anything without such a man. God would not know what to do without you and me. Well, this is rather extraordinary and a mystery for many of us as we begin to ponder non-duality. So importantly, folks, when we modulate to the non-dual perspective, again, we're going to be letting go of the idea that anything is happening to us. What we are going to modulate to is allowing life to be of itself. All right, let's begin with 3 deep inhalations. We're going to radically accept ourselves as we begin the breathing process and reduce the conceptualizing, which tends to provide us a kind of an editorial about what is happening to us. And we're going to be letting that go when we modulate to the non-relative, non-dual perspective. Let's start with our expulsion. Breathe out through the throat. Get all the air out. Breathe in through the nose. Hold the breath. Relax completely. So the deep breathing is helping us shift our affective state. It's going to support our ability to modulate into non-dual perspective. Let's expel all the air out again. Breathe in through the nose. Breathe in. Hold the breath. And let's modulate into the meditative placement of attention by coming to our senses. Let's listen closely without judgment. And we're able to see the restless mind when we're in it is as it is. When we are wanting for nothing. So we recognize that Meister Eckhart understands that the whole is being provided at every moment. So when we or he enters the meditative placement of attention, in which we are not self-aggrandizing, we're not purposeful, we are not seeking, we have a sense of full saturation. Fully saturated. With what? Well, we're changing our perspective. We are no longer trying to get away from life. In other words, life is living and dying. We are in the full acceptance of the ephemeral nature of existence. And we're very comfortable with that. We don't judge it. We are trusting it. We are trusting life itself. The meditative placement of attention is communion. And let's debrief. There are more than one non-dual practices, and I encourage you to recognize that the non-dual meditative placement of attention has no me in it. That idea that life is happening to us is a dual perspective, and we often, in some of our disciplines, non-dual practices like vipassana, which is insight-oriented meditation, we address our senses and we experience the body. However, you can see the problem with that. We have the idea that we are other than the body. We are other than, it's still life is happening to us. So it produces a bit of a problem there, if you are following me. So I recommend this methodology if you are focused on this marvelous expansion and this marvelous awakening to understand that when we modulate into the meditative placement of attention, we let go of the idea that something is happening to us. Instead, we allow life to simply happen. It is happening unto itself. And we're going to continue to chew this over and continue to practice in this fashion. So thank you for tuning in, and I encourage you to continue to tune in. Our next session will focus on Article 14 and further. That is the 14th article of evidence against Meister Eckhart, and further we may take several articles in our next video. Thanks for your participation, and stay well. Tune in again.